What's going on, everybody? Back at it with another New York Giants recap video. And in this video, I'm joined by my co-host, Hank and Dictor. Hank, how's it going? I know you were at the game yesterday, so tough loss for Big Blue.
Yeah, it was not fun having to sit in the freezing cold for about, roughly 2.5 hours. I left after the fumble that happened towards the end of the fourth quarter. Because let's face it, if you were watching that game, you knew after that fumble that the game was essentially over. Even though I thought the game was over right when the Lions scored that touchdown on their first drive in the third quarter. But that having been said, as much as I loved being at MetLife in person to see the Giants, and I've been doing it a little bit more often lately the past few years, this game was not so fun to sit through, not so much because of the absolute shit show that the Giants put us through, but because the weather was just absolutely brutally cold. And Tom, I don't know about you, but if you were at that game, I'm sure you probably, like me, would have had to go right back into the living room, set up a fire, and have like multiple blankets on once you got back home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I wasn't there considering the performance that they had. But before we dive into that, folks, and talk more about the game, make sure to go check us out on Big Blue Avenue, all of our social media platforms on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And this episode is presented by our sponsor, BetUS. You can sign up with our promo code below at join125. Get a 125% sign up bonus when you sign up with BetUS. You can bet on the go, anywhere, anytime from your mobile device. That is America's number one favorite sportsbook, BetUS, where the game begins. So, diving into our Week 11 recap here, Hank, and it was not pretty. The New York Giants fall to the Detroit Lions by a final score of 31-18. Daniel Jones in this game, 27 of 44 for a season-high 341 passing yards. He did have one touchdown pass, but he was sacked twice and threw 2 interceptions on top of his 50 rushing yards and 1 score. Overall, I don't necessarily blame Jones for the loss, but the 2 interceptions definitely weren't great. I feel like in this game, he had to throw the ball a lot more because I thought Detroit surprisingly did a really good job at attacking the box and not letting Saquon do much at all on the ground.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. I think Detroit's game plan really was to shut down the run with Saquon Barkley, and if that was the case, then they pretty much did their job. And as far as Daniel Jones goes, like, I didn't think this was one of his worst performances. I mean, granted, I'm not going to tell you that he was necessarily great. I mean, 2 interceptions are pretty bad. To 1 touchdown isn't great either way you look at it, but at the same time, you knew that an interception from Daniel Jones was bound to happen eventually. And look, as far one of those interceptions, in my opinion, was not his fault. In fact, I think you also have to give Aiden Hutchinson credit where credit is due. I mean, look, I don't know how you viewed him or whether you thought he should have been taken that high in the NFL draft, but there's a reason he was taken at number 2 this past year. And then as far as the O-line goes, absolute dud. What can I say? And obviously, the injuries at that position did not help either, especially losing Phillips and Feliciano, especially now that he had to be replaced by Nick Gates. And here's hoping that Evan Neal plays Thursday, and I think they're probably going to end up playing him anyways, but the Giants may be in a position where they have to rush some guys back, and that's not going to be pretty.
No, and back to your point there on the offensive line, Shane Lemieux wound up getting the start at left guard. He was bad. He was not. He had 39 total offensive snaps. He surrendered 5 pressures and allowed 1 sack. He was so bad, they wound up putting Josh Azudu in the game at left guard. John Feliciano left with a neck injury. As you mentioned, he was replaced by Nick Gates. Great to see him back at center, but not under those circumstances. Tyre Phillips, who was filling the void for Evan Neal at right tackle, left with a neck injury. He was replaced by Matt Pert, who I thought was okay. Nothing great. Hopefully Evan Neal can play Thursday. You're right, because it really affected Saquon Barkley. And I'm not just going to blame the offense for the offensive line for Saquon's play. I'm also going to blame not just the play calling, but Saquon's shoulder injury. It's really hurting him in the run game. Ever since he suffered that shoulder issue, he hasn't been the same. Now, granted, he's among the league leaders in rushing in the NFL, but when you have 15 rushes for 22 yards and total just 35 scrimmage yards the entire game, that's a problem, especially when that he's the identity of your offense. You know, Daniel Jones was forced to throw a lot. He threw the ball 44 times. He was pressured on 17 of those dropbacks. That's just a little bit under half. That's not acceptable. The offensive line needs to do a much better job run blocking and pass blocking. And Hank, now I think after Sunday's performance by the entire offense, you could see why the Giants weren't throwing the ball as much earlier on in the season, because their offensive line is not very good at pass protection. And the Daniel Jones haters, maybe they started to realize that a little bit. I do think the Hutchinson pick was a bad read by Jones off the play action, but Jones is the only quarterback in the league, and this is just my opinion. I might be a little biased because I'm a Giants fan and I am a Jones supporter, but to me it seems like Jones is the only quarterback in the league that is not allowed to ever make a mistake. He's not allowed to throw an interception, right? The second he throws a pick, that's it. I want Jones gone. Everybody will find an excuse. And I was texting a Daniel Jones hater yesterday and said, be honest with me. Are you a Daniel Jones hater? And he said, yes. But the reasoning why is that Dave Gettleman took him 6th overall and the expectations haven't been there. But okay, is that all you got for me? That's why you're a hater? It has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with the Giants. So stop hating on the guy. Gettleman's gone. He's playing well. He didn't play great this game, but he's playing well overall this year. So I'll be honest with you, like Wan'Dale Robinson, hope he heals, by the way. Hank, he doesn't have 100 receiving yards if not for Daniel Jones. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, obviously, because you need a quarterback to throw the ball, and Daniel Jones is a much better quarterback than a lot of people give him credit for. And yeah, no, I don't entirely disagree with that take. I'm sure there are other fan bases who will tell you that like one of their quarterbacks like gets, shamed a lot after an interception. But with that having been said, it's not like I really have a reason to disagree, just because, Tom, how many times have you and I said this on our live streams? As much as I love the Giants fan base, in fact, I would say that the Giants fan base is tied with the Rangers fan base for the best out of all the New York sports fan base. Again, maybe this is my bias take right there, but at the same time, there is also a good fraction of the Giants fan base that is absolutely toxic. Like, and I'm not just talking about when Daniel Jones is the quarterback. We saw it when we had Eli Manning. Anytime a Giants quarterback has a bad game, and we could even go back to the Phil Simms era, they get scrutinized like, it's the end. And that's like the one thing I hate about this fan base. Like, I'm sorry. And I hate, and I'm obviously not talking about every single member of the Giants fan base. 75 to 80% of them are absolutely awesome. But
Yeah.
It's true for every fan base too, not just ours.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. And Wan'Dale Robinson had a phenomenal game. In a game where the Giants were heavily outrushed, they relied on him greatly. This was before he wound up tearing his ACL, unfortunately. He had 9 catches for 100 yards on 13 targets, used as a phenomenal slot gadget player. I know you were there in person, made an awesome catch along the sideline.
Oh, the crowd was going nuts after that.
And how about the well-dressed Darius Slayton? 5 catches for 86 yards. Again, just another great game for him. And even Richie James showed out. You know, people were calling for this guy to get cut a few weeks ago. 3 catches for 48 yards and 1 touchdown, his first touchdown of the season. So James and Slayton, I think, both stepped up, especially after Wan'Dale left the game. And Kenny Golladay, 2 catches against his old team. Congratulations. He now has 4 for the season.
You know, it was funny, like, when he caught that pass, like, I have thought that chant for Kenny was, like, sarcasm, but then after you heard the Kenny, Kenny, Kenny chants, I think there maybe the good amount of it was, like, legit because I think, the Giants, like, are so desperate for receiving help that it was nice to see
Yeah.
him make a catch for once, but with that having been said, I wanna see that more often, like, as great as it was in the moment, like, I'm not here, like, throwing a bouquet of flowers, like, at Kenny Golladay just for that one big touchdown. I mean, whoop-de-doo. You had a big catch, like, do more. That's what you're getting paid for. Sorry to be the Debbie Downer, but
Exactly. And the thing is, too, like Jones is throwing to these guys that you've never heard of before. Isaiah Hodgins, I know he had that costly lost fumble, but he's been pretty good in the receiving game the last 2 weeks. Lawrence Cager had a touchdown last week. He had 2 catches yesterday. The Giants' offense, despite all their woes and struggles, they were 5 for 13 on third down. Not awful. Sorry, that might actually be 6 for 13. Nope, 5 for 13. 3 for 3 scoring touchdowns in the red zone, which is something you would have never even thought of last season. 2 for 3 on fourth down. They had over 400 yards of total offense, and granted, a lot of those yards were because they were down by so much and couldn't stop Jamal Williams for a rat's ass. And that's where the problems came in, Hank. The Lions were 4 for 5 scoring touchdowns in the red zone, 3 touchdown rushes by Jamal Williams, and I think the other one was by DeAndre Swift. And here's the real difference maker of this game. Real difference maker. Now, I'm never going to blame the refs, but I did think in this game specifically, there were a couple of calls that were missed. The Micah McFadden pass interference, I did not think that was a flag. And there was one other penalty I can't remember. I did not think that was a flag at all. Do I think that would have changed the outcome of the game? Absolutely not. But I do think there were a couple missed calls in this game anyway. Back to the point, Giants had 8 penalties and 3 turnovers. Lions had 5 penalties and none. There's the difference.
yeah, I think you pretty much nailed what I was about to say. Like, say what you want about some of the decisions that Brian Dable made during this game, and I'm sure you and I will talk about them
We're getting
on
to it.
we're getting to it or we'll talk about them on Wednesday when we do our live stream. But one thing I did appreciate from Brian Dable, he did not say anything about the refs, and he said you're not going to win games if you're going to be out turnovered 3-0, and then, like you said, the penalties cost them. Now, again, I don't disagree. I think the refs absolutely did not do a great job calling games, but the problem is you're not always going to get the benefit of the refs calls every single game. I'm sorry, but that's life. Just don't turn the ball over, and then we're probably not even having this conversation. Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And switching gears here to the defensive side of the ball, Julian Love, 8 tackles. He's been the leading tackler all year, one of the few guys who's remained healthy in the secondary. Dexter Lawrence had a solid game with 7 stops and a QB hit. Leonard Williams was decent. Jalen Smith and Micah McFadden have now taken the lead as the 2 top linebackers on this team. One would have ever thought. And who the hell would have thought Rodarius Williams would be starting by the end of this game? He played 27 snaps, had 4 tackles as Adoree Jackson and Fabian Moreau both left with injuries. Moreau left with a ribs injury. And Adoree Jackson sprained his MCL returning a punt. He's out the next 4 to 6 weeks. Now, I want to ask you this, and I'll give you my opinion on this. Should Dable have had Adoree Jackson back there returning punts? Because I know back in the day, Jim Fossil used to have Tiki Barber back there. He used to have Amani Toomer back there. Brian Dable had Adoree Jackson back there. Does Dable deserve some of the blame for having Adoree Jackson back there? Because I think so. Not all of it, but some.
Now, Tom, I want to point out another name since you mentioned Jim Fossil. Jason Sehorn was another guy who he had back returning kickoffs. And
That's
unfortunately, that injury brought, I'm sure if you ask older Giant fans who remember, I obviously was in diapers during that era. So there are Giant fans that probably remember when Jason Sehorn tore his ACL during the 98 preseason. And that more or less affected his career. Because if you look at him in 96, 97, Jason Sehorn was really quick and he was emerging as one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. But unfortunately, we know how that turned out. But getting back to Adoree Jackson, I don't know how much of this was on Brian Dable, but absolutely not. No, he should not have had him returning punts, kickoffs. And I would also say that, like, it is especially bad because, we already knew the Giants were getting paper thin injury wise. So to have him there was a risk to begin with.
Yeah.
So once I saw him being taken off the field, I was just absolutely infuriated. And you can ask my buddies Moshman and JB who were with me at the game. They'll tell you, like, there were a lot of people in our section who were saying the same thing, and they were literally fuming after that. However, with that being said, even though I wish that Brian Dable would have felt a little bit more remorse, at the same time, he's also not wrong that football is a game where a lot of injuries can happen even on freak plays. So in that sense, I'm not going to fully blame Brian Dable, but at the same time, there was just no reason for him to be taking that risk. And, not to mention, as much as you want to call out Brian Dable for that decision, look, coaches aren't going to be perfect every single % of the time. So I still say that he's a coach of the year candidate, but that is going to make him look pretty bad. I will say that.
This was Brian Dable's worst coached game as a head coach.
Easily.
He should have not had Adoree Jackson back there returning punts, especially because of the fact that we were depleted in the secondary. Outside of him, I'm not sure if Moreau was hurt yet. He might have been. You're looking at Rodarius Williams, Cordell Flott, and Nick McLeod. Now, granted, Nick McLeod had a decent game, but this is my take on it, right?
Go for it.
All right, Richie James fumbled twice. He hasn't returned punts in a couple weeks now. Eventually, you got to put him back there again. Eventually, you have to put him back there. Gary Brightwell's returning kicks. If he's returning kicks, why not give him a shot returning punts? They were having Alex Bachman back there on punts in the preseason. I really wish that they would have maybe considered giving Bachman a roster spot now that I think back at it. I just wish Dable had taken a little bit more accountability during the post-game interview, because there's something I want to say that I already said to you via text, but I'm not going to say it on this video because a lot of our fan base will get upset. Even though I do think there is some truth to it. And basically, I'll sugarcoat it by saying there's one previous coach that the Giants had who would have not had Adoree Jackson back there returning that punt. Mm-hmm. And whether you like the guy or not, it's true. This is something that Dable has to learn from and be more accountable for. Don't use it's football as an excuse. I differ a little bit in that answer. While, yes, it is football, know the situation that you're in. Know the lack of depth that you have. Xavier McKinney got into an ATV accident over the bye week. Jason Pinnock got injured multiple times in this game, left with a jaw injury. Fabian Moreau with a ribs injury. And you have a game in 4 days, now 3, against a division rival that has the same record as you, that's already beaten you once, and you're playing them in Jerry World. Good luck. Brian Dable, you better have a good response. Otherwise, you know how New York is. Fans are not going to be happy with him if they don't put out a good performance on Thanksgiving, regardless of who's on the football field. Now, we look over the snaps at cornerback in this game. Nick McLeod, former Buffalo Bill, now playing for the Giants, had 39 snaps. Cordell Flott, the rookie third-rounder, had 22. Darnay Holmes had 34 in the slot. So right now, Hank, with Moreau and Jackson both not practicing today, I think you have to look at Nick McLeod, Cordell Flott, Rodarius Williams, and Darnay Holmes. Those are the 4 corners we're throwing out there in this Dallas game. I'm sorry. That's the bottom line. Not because Stone Cold said so, because I said so. Because quite frankly, right now, Brian Dable made an ass out of you and me by making that decision.
Yeah, like I said, You and I are differing a little bit in that department, but
I'm
either
I'm
way,
more harsh. You're more conservative
we're
here.
pretty much
Yeah,
agreeing to disagree
yeah,
essentially, with
yeah.
regards to Brian Dable.
Which is fine.
And yeah, no,
I don't
totally.
fully fault them, but I think there has to be accountability there. And uh, but let's move on because
That's totally fair though.
I also didn't think Wink Martindale coached a great game either. The Giants defense had 0 sacks again. I think it's a combination of the players just not executing out there. Kayvon Thibodeau, he looked decent at times. Did not look great. Now the Giants blitzed on 62% of the Lions' pass plays. They only had 3 pressures the entire game. Jared Goff had all year to throw back there. It's crazy. We talk about Jamal Williams and how good he was running the rock with those 3 TDs. He wasn't even the leading rusher of this game. The leading rusher was Justin Jackson. I mean, the Lions had a 3-headed monster in the backfield. And to make matters worse, when you have a wide receiver like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had 76 receiving yards, I mean, that's very impressive in its own. And Tone Gordon, who was on our show, Hank, Thursday night, mentioned Khalif Raymond, a former Giant, by the way. Um, that 3+ catch streak continues for him. So the Lions offense, man, they did what they had to do. They held the ball for over 31 minutes, 6 for 13 on third down. I respect, absolute respect. Dan Campbell, respect.
Yes, and hopefully we don't hopefully we don't have to hear about him throwing chairs again, whether
Yeah,
it be in victory or loss. But Tom, I had a question for you, but now I'm like
sure.
thinking on it all of a sudden. But I was gonna say, so as far as actually, you know what, I'll get back to it. If it comes up to me, I'll remember it.
All right. Sometimes when you don't think about it, it comes back. But anyway, I'll move on to the Lions' defensive standouts because I thought Aiden Hutchinson had a phenomenal game. He had the pass deflection and the pick, 3 stops as well. Ali McNeil was a boss. That's a guy I really wanted the Giants to draft back in 2021,
Mhm.
but we didn't take him. He had 4 tackles, 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss, and 3 QB hits. And Sam mentioned her player that she wanted to steal from Detroit, and Alex Anzalone had 5 tackles, 2 QB hits in this game. So Detroit had some really good performances. And Andy's guy, the safety out of Illinois, the rookie Kirby Joseph, had that pick off of Daniel Jones as well. So all around, Detroit had a great game defensively. I mean, hell, former Falcons reject John Kaminsky had a sack in this game and 2 tackles for loss.
Oh, now I
Incredible.
remember what I wanted to ask you. How much of that game do you think had to do with them possibly looking ahead to Dallas? And do you think that was even a factor at all?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not buying it as much people are. Um, do I think it was in their heads? Of course, because the game was 4 days away while they were playing it. But here's my thing. You and I both knew this game would not be easy by any stretch. You and I both felt
Absolutely.
that this was a losable game, which is why I think I barely had the Giants covering the 3-point spread that they were favored by. Um, I was not too confident in this game. This 4-game stretch that the Giants played between Seattle, Jacksonville, Houston, and Detroit. I felt at the beginning of the season that Detroit was the more losable game than Seattle. The fact that we only took 2 out of 4 between Jacksonville, Houston, Detroit, and Seattle is concerning because now you look at what's left on the schedule and who the Giants are without, Hank. It's rough. I don't think it was really the Giants looking ahead too much. I think it was just more the Giants getting hurt and bad coaching. You know, it was just they were unable to make in-game adjustments. You know, Jared Goff did a phenomenal job managing the game, and credit to that Detroit offensive line: Penei Sewell, Frank Ragnall, Taylor Decker. I mean, they offset that Giants front beautifully. I mean, hell, only 3 pressures the entire game, Hank. You can't say enough about Detroit's O line. They were fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with you. Like, I am sure the thought probably crossed their mind, or at least like some of the players and maybe the coaching to a certain extent. But at the same time, I agree. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, and I think it was Big Blue VCR who tweeted this out, and he pretty much said it best. Anyone who's a true Giant fan knows that the Giants never make this easy. So the fact that they lost to the Lions shouldn't really have been a surprise to like those of us who've been watching the Giants for many years. But the way they lost, I think, is the real surprise. And, I think you and I pretty much said it best. This was by far their worst loss of the season, at least if we're talking about performance wise.
Yeah,
And then not to mention, I think the injuries definitely do not help either. But it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back against the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, in normal good years, I would say, okay, I'll trade this loss for a win over the Cowboys, but that's not really the type of thinking I can have this year given the
right.
circumstances. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Um,
I would love to be able to trade this loss for a Cowboys win, but that's probably wishful thinking at this point.
I think maybe a week or two ago you could have said that, but now it's starting to look a little doubtful. But who knows, right? That's why you play these football games, right? Dallas has not been super consistent this year either, even though they are 7-3 now. And what you just said before we go over the injuries and wrap this one up, the final score doesn't tell anything. You just said something very important, right? This was the Giants' worst loss of the season. They lost by 13 in this game. They lost to Seattle by 14. But unlike this game, the Giants were tied with Seattle heading into the fourth quarter, 13 apiece. The Giants just fell apart in the fourth quarter. This game, Detroit was in control the entire game. I think the Giants held one lead, 6-3. How bad was the wind? I want to ask you that before we get into this laundry list of injuries here. I thought it looked horrendous.
Oh my gosh, it was absolutely swirling all game long. And Tom, I had another point that I wanted to mention too. And I know you're probably going to be disagreeing with me about this point, but I honestly would have tried to go for two after that first touchdown. Now, make no mistake, normally I'm not a guy that would go for two after in like the first quarter, but given the circumstances and given the way the wind was going, and it seems to me like they knew that it was going to be a problem, I might have considered going for those extra 2 points. In fact, if you disagree with me, that like again, that's totally fine because like I said, I'm not usually for going for two so early in the game. That being said, at least after the second touchdown, I probably would have considered going for two. But again, it is what it is. My point, the fact of the matter is, it was like pretty much swirling, pretty much the same type of win that a lot of old school Giant fans remember from the old Giant Stadium. Back in the '86 NFC Championship when you had Sean Landetta knowing
Yeah.
how to punt
Yeah.
it towards that direction.
Now, before I answer this question, let me ask you this. Are you saying this should have been a theme throughout the entire game where they went for two, or just on that first possession in general?
I would have said as a theme because, like I said, it seemed to me that everyone knew that the win was a problem, and Gano seemed to be having problems with kicking, like even during the warm up. So that's why I thought they should have gone for two. At least that's my opinion. If you disagree with me, that's totally fine, and I totally get why. At least you would disagree with like the first touchdown because, like I said, I'm not normally a guy that like goes for two on the first touchdown.
Here's my thing. I wasn't there. You were there. Yeah, I saw the win statistics and it
Mm-hmm.
looked brutal. My thing is this: Detroit's kicker didn't have any problems. He doesn't even play at MetLife,
Right.
right? One and two. I'm born and bred from the Tom Coughlin School of Coaching, and the saying goes is this: you always take the points. Um, extra points more guaranteed typically than a 2 point conversion. So I guess I'll disagree with you slightly there, Hank, but I do see that perspective. And you being there, if I was there, I might think a little differently about it. I'm not saying I would go for it if I was there. I think it's a kick you got to make, in my opinion. Like one hit the upright and then the other just like shanked. So not shanked, but he curved it. So, but anyway, the Giants lose, tough loss, And here comes the laundry list of injuries. John Feliciano and Tyre Phillips both left the game with neck injuries. Jason Pinnock got hurt twice, had a jaw issue. Fabian Moreau with the ribs. Adoree Jackson, he had the sprained MCL. And then, of course, Wan'Dale Robinson with the torn ACL. Giants did a little walkthrough today and light practice again. I mean, this is concerning because they're only going to practice again tomorrow. Remember, Wednesday's a travel day down to Texas. So this is very, very concerning for those who did not practice today. Daniel Bellinger did not practice. Josh Azudu, John Feliciano, and Tyre Phillips all did not practice with the same injury, a neck injury. To me, I had no report of Azudu getting hurt in this game. So I was a little surprised to see him out with a neck injury, unless that was a lingering issue from the previous week. I'm not so sure. But honestly, you might be looking at Andrew Thomas, Shane Lemieux, Nick Gates, Mark Gawinski, and Matt Pert starting on Thursday. You're going back to that 2020 offensive line with Mark Lewinsky in there, who's basically another version of Kevin Zeitler, who's not as good as pass blocking, but you get the point. So, and then after that, you're down to guys like Jack Anderson. We all saw what happened when Jack Anderson got in the game with Coach Dable. But yeah, we'll see if those offensive linemen could get healthy. Also, I didn't see this one come, but Richie James did not practice with a knee injury. Hell, he's supposed to be the Wan'Dale replacement. I mean, Wan'Dale tearing his ACL at this point in the season is devastating because he likely won't even be ready for the start of next season. And who knows if he'll ever be the same player again. I mean, hell, it really, really sucks. It really, really sucks. The Giants, you mentioned this the other day, or today actually. The Giants aren't just playing against the visitors when they're at home. They're playing against their own turf. It's really sad.
I stand by that text.
It's really, really, really sad. And then Evan Neal, the good news, Evan Neal was limited with a knee injury, and Azeez Ojulari was activated off injured reserve. I don't know if Ojulari is going to play Thursday. I'm hopeful, but it's looking good for Evan Neal. So if Neal can slide in at right tackle, it'll give Jones at least a little more time to decide and throw the football. So that's my hope for Thursday, Hank. But before we get off here, any final thoughts?
I would love to see a Thanksgiving miracle. I mean, I'll probably get into this more, but if the Giants even score a touchdown on Thanksgiving, it'll be a miracle. But you'll see why I'm mentioning this, at least from a historic perspective. But we'll see what happens. All I'm asking for is the game to be watchable. And, at the end of the day, I also need to stay a bit grounded because let's remember, I did say 7 wins before the season. Now, again, granted, if you'd told me those 7 wins would come before Thanksgiving, I probably would have looked at you like you had 3 heads. But at the same time, my magic number for the Giants, I believe I said 9 or 10 wins would be playoff worthy. I still don't think that's unrealistic, but
no.
Let me just hold on. Let me move my little stand here and let me put my fist on this table for a second because you know what I'm about to do. Knock on wood, so that way we don't have any more bad luck with injuries, because if you've been following the Giants for as long as we have, you know that we just can never seem to catch a break with these injuries. But again, that's pretty much all I have to say. Hopefully, let's keep the faith, Giant fans.
Absolutely, folks. And Hank, thank you very much for joining this live stream here tonight for the Week 11 recap. Folks, stay tuned throughout the course of the week on our social media on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter for our film review breakdown, where I will analyze the top 3 Giants plays from the game against the Detroit Lions. I'm going to try to get that up this week at least. And then Wednesday night, we'll be having our live stream at 7 p.m. No Thursday live stream this week because of Thanksgiving. It'll be Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Hank and I, we will be joined by a returning guest.